Hello everyone. Today we are going to be having a little talk about a curious and sort of important topic in labor theory economics, namely about value. The video will really be an introductory overview of it, though done in a bit of an unconventional way, mostly because I think it will help with building a sort of intuition we'll be needing for the conclusion. The video itself will be made up of three parts. First, we'll be taking a look at what makes an object in the abstract, basically what in so many different ways makes it valuable. Second, we'll be going over the fundamental concepts like exchange value, concrete and abstract labor, and so on, until we get a feeling for what makes a special sort of value different from the others we'll mention. And in the concluding part, it's important to keep in mind we will not really be handling some stunning problems or debates, but we will be able to note some, I think, important questions that all too often get left unasked. So while I've still got you sitting at the edges of your chairs, we will start the video off by talking about simple, mundane, everyday table. Now, this table, as an object, it possesses certain properties, certain attributes. So this specific table has the chemical composition of wood. It also takes up certain spatial dimensions. For instance, we can simplify and say its surface is maybe 1 by 2 meters and it is 0.7 meters tall and so on. We can likewise clearly see this table is right side up. It's not flipped over. So it also has a rotation relative to the Earth. There's also a certain amount of heat within it. It has a mass, a charge, and so on and so forth. Once again, these are all physical properties of this object, the table. We'll call these properties objective because they are an inherent part of the object in question. Obviously, being a good table and all, one may attribute to it the property of being useful as such, as a sort of device for holding things above the ground. To this extent, this table, it is useful because its surface is 1 by 2 meters, because it is 0.7 meters tall, made of wood, rotated right side up, and so on. But for these physical properties to become useful, usefulness must of course be attributed to them. This is because usefulness, it implies a subject, someone or something finding in and ascribing to these physical properties some attribute of use, some useful factor. Now, obviously, this makes usefulness subjective. Imagine a small child, for instance. There is little use in a 0.7 meter tall table, simply because it's too tall for the kid. The child cannot reach it. Or imagine a madman. The table standing upright may itself seem very useless to them. Likewise, this subjectivity, it's really very dependent on traditions, on the practices of society the subject is part of. Hats are a good example. In our, well, my culture, at least in warmer regions, they've fallen out of fashion a bit. Or maybe take uranium, which was historically mostly used for its color, so for dyeing and stuff. But today, it obviously has a much more important role in society, a much more important and historically contingent use. Sadly, sometimes also for dyeing, but of a different sort. Now, this is all value in use. This is use value from the perspective of consumption, of subjects using the object in question, the table. This is usually how the topic of use value is approached. However, we will find that many useful objects do not really appear ready-made out of thin air. In fact, Mother Nature can be very unaccommodating in this regard, right? For this reason, we engage in shaping nature to our use. And this process of shaping the natural properties of objects into different, maybe more useful properties, this process is, I think, something we should not be willy-nilly separating from the object itself. Basically, the work of the carpenter, the time she worked on the object, the energy she spent, every stroke of her chisel can be seen as a part of the table. So this is where we encounter the often neglected discussion on the use value of the production process itself. One may find that the process of making this particular table is very enjoyable, artistically involving, maybe even socially honorable, gratifying and fulfilling in many regards. at least compared to some other table making process or some other type of production. Under capitalism, as purely consumers of this end product, the production process tied to it, the labor involved, they are mysterious things. And this is assuming we even bother to dwell on it in the first place. Yet, as producers, this process is in fact life defining. Yet it is, unlike consumption, almost completely out of our control. Now, this distinction between producing and consuming, it should be noted, is, I think, by no means a universal state of affairs. In societies where labor and its products are a communal sort of effort, consumption and production appear, in fact, as clearly connected activities, which they are. And they are here in no way vexing or striking. They appear as if inseparable. Now, back to our table. As a matter of fact, shockingly, this table is not the only table in the world. It is by its properties completely unique, yes, but it is only an object of a class of all manner of different tables, objects which are connected by the definition of what a table is, connected by certain use value properties. More than that, a table is not the only class of object in the world. Thus, we have tables, chairs, cups, and bowls. We're talking about a truly vast array of objects. So, just as this relation between object and man creates a set of properties unique to this accord, likewise, the relation between object and other objects also creates a set of properties. In fact, a very bizarre set of properties. We will call this the set of interobjective or abstract properties, the properties of a set of sets of objects. For instance, a property of this set of sets would be the average heat of two tables, or of all of your friends' tables, or even of all the tables on Earth. In fact, all of these are properties of this set of sets. And not only these, but also the sum length, not only of tables, but of all objects with length, as well as the relative relations of the masses of each table to every other table, and so on and so forth. These properties are not the objective, unique properties of this object alone. However, they are, just like use values, fed by every object's individual physical objective properties. The physical properties are the object itself, after all. Properties which we compare with other objects' properties to get this interobjective set of new properties. So what we're really doing is we're abstracting from the individual, the unique, to create a common property. Now, worth noting is that this common property may or may not be equivalent to any one individual property of an object within the set. In fact, the equivalence of an interobjective property, the property of a set, and a unique property of an object within it is purely the result of chance. It's a coincidence, right? It's much like taking an average of all the heights of all your friends, and I do hope a set exists here, and finding out this mathematical average is exactly the height of one of them. When you think about it, it is a bit unexpected, no? So, as it is safe to assume no two objects are alike, drawing any equivalence between them requires some kind of abstractive process, such as this. A process where what makes these separate objects specific is ignored and common substance emerges. Thus, we have the general set of all interobjective abstract properties, which are tied to this particular table by means of its relation to other objects which make the set. Now, back to more down-to-earth matters. Having described this simple framework, it is now time to tackle the star guest of the video and find out how value itself actually fits in with all this. We should start with a peculiar yet very familiar human relation, exchange. Obviously, we can simply take this table right away and we can try to pawn it off, basically to the first passerby we stumble on. Now, the stranger offers us a bag of apples. And I don't know about you, but being hungry and having like 10 tables at home for some reason, I may even agree. Now, this kind of exchange is called incidental. It only happened because a peculiar set of circumstances befell us and the Appleman, driving us to exchange our products. This exchange is based on nothing but an agreement or compromise between our respective sets of use value desires. None of us had the explicit intention of exchanging our objects until we agreed the act necessary. Now, for exchange to take place not in this incidental, almost accidental form, but as a matter of plan, as production for exchange, first two conditions have to be met. Firstly, there has to exist something we call the division of labor, such that society is divided into different appendages of the whole, each producing objects of use for the whole, for society. So the table producer does not generally produce her own apples or her candles. Yet it is socially expected she have all of these, most of all surely food for survival. To her opposed are the apple and candle producers. They, on the other hand, demand to have at her tables. As the second key condition, the table, apple, and candle producers, they can't share. The glue sealing the cracks of these divisions in labor, it must not be that of cooperation, but of competition, of antagonism. People must struggle against each other. It is therefore necessary that the products of labor become private property of their respective producers. So with Sodom and with Gomorrah, we have the basis of a society of exchange. And this is the society in which we find our table. Yet in this, the table and the apples become imbued with new properties of a fantastic nature. Over time, a kind of rules of exchange will emerge on the market, and we will find our table ready to exchange for, say, 3 bags of apples, or 2 racks of candles, or half a gram of gold. Likewise, 3 bags of apples can be exchanged for no table at all, but instead a quarter gram of gold and 1 rack of candles can be bought. This can, of course, go on and on in seemingly endless combinations. So this is the exchange value of the table, of any commodity. The definite amounts of other commodities it can be exchanged for, willing to switch places. But this raises an important question. What does it mean for these items to switch places? These specific items, in these specific quantities no less. What does it mean to exchange a table for 3 bags of apples? Or what amounts to the same thing, to exchange both the table and 3 bags of apples for the same amount of money, for the same price? What precisely is this substance that the table and the 3 bags of apples share in common, which warrants their exchange as fair and equivalent? Certainly, there exists nothing of the kind. As we mentioned, tables are good for holding things above the ground, apples being a very poor substitute in this regard. They, on the other hand, are better used for sating hunger, and the table is usually no competitor. Of course, there could be a table made out of apples, but you'd eat the leg and it would become unstable, and you get the point. You can't reasonably hope to eat the first, or to use the second for elevating heavy objects. As we noted, only by sharing physical properties do shared use values arise, and this, in this case, they do not. Now, the two could, by coincidence, share such a property, for instance, weight or volume. But it is just that, a coincidence. We should be very surprised to see any of the two worth their weight in gold, for instance, or their volume in silver. So maybe we shouldn't be looking at the details here. For the many commodities in our world to be exchangeable as equivalents, maybe it is necessary to, in a way, turn a blind eye to all that makes them specific and separate as objects. Now, in order to do that, we may have more luck if we recall the realm of the abstract, the interobjective, where difference being transformed into commonality is basically the name of the game. So we must find out what value in the abstract really is. Now, finding out which abstract property is one regulative crisis of value, however, is by no means an easy task. In fact, it is something which has been confounding economic theorists ever since the commodity form first reared its ugly head. To be clear, we're talking about millennia. So let's try one approach which, while not robust, I think has some merit in its intuitive appeal. So we have observed that one table is worth 3 bags of apples, and 3 bags exactly. But we know from life that prices can change. They can change a lot, in fact. Some things get cheaper, others get expensive. And the same is true of our apples and our tables as well. So imagine a market crier. He gets up on some platform, rings his bell, and shouts, the table is now worth 4 bags of apples instead of 3, meaning the value of the table relative to the value of the apples has increased. It is now worth more apples than before. It is now up to us to inquire as to how this transformation could have come about. Suppose for a start, we have two producers of goods. One makes the tables, the other picks apples. Obviously, the table producer may have some higher costs than the apple producer. After all, you need to purchase not only the tools for carving, but also the raw materials, the wood. But this just begs the question of how the raw materials and tools are themselves priced, right? If the table should need some amount of screws, for example, while the apples would need this and that many bags, we are none the wiser, as we do not know the value, the price, the cost of these bags and screws. So let us for now leave the screwing behind and simply assume that both take the same value of inputs, whatever they may be, before and after the change in price. So there is no change in the cost of the materials to account for the price change. Another common explanation is that the cost of labor could play a big part. This is very close, but it has some problems. Problems of much the same manner as the question of tools and raw materials, in fact. So with labor costs, we should note that what we are talking about here is what labor is paid, about the wage only, which can be assumed to be a bundle of goods, just like the raw material inputs. As we still don't know how to value the goods, this becomes a sort of roundabout, where the value of goods is determined by wages, which are in turn determined by the value of the goods, and so on in circles. Instead, we'll just ignore it and just assume that the wages of the apple producer and the wage of the table craftsman are the same before and after the change in prices. And so we don't care about this. Another obfuscation remains, and it's a really common one. Basically, supply and demand. If demand for tables rises faster than the supply, and likewise the demand for apples rises slower than the supply, then one will aptly increase in value by virtue of being rarer and more sought after. The other's price will in turn fall. This we can do away with. Let us, for the sake of argument, assume the market is doing its job for once, and all goods are produced to match demand exactly. So everyone who wants a table gets a table. Everyone selling an apple finds a buyer. A perfect market in perfect equilibrium. So supply and demand, while definitely important, we will be putting it under the rug for another time. But what further avenue is left for us to take? To summarize, table producers can't rely on supply and demand, on the value of their wage bundle or of their tools to explain the change in price. I would argue there exists a sort of intuitive line of reasoning for shaping value. Going back to production, we noted how there is a great divide between two kinds of useful objects. There are those such as natural air, water, sunshine, and so on, that are for the most part readily abundant. Someone trying to sell you the air around you should definitely choose a different trade. On the other hand, there is a lot of useful stuff that requires the labor of humans to be produced. It is only this latter sort which is subject to private property, to the division of labor, and hence to exchange. Now, is this the answer we're looking for? Could the source of value be labor itself? Perhaps, but this raises the important question of how should we compare these disparate kinds of labor, which is involved in producing our disparate commodities. I'm sure it is evident that if society spent no time making food, it would starve. And the more time it spent making food, the more food there would be, right? So perhaps it is not labor of a specific sort that is of interest, but actually labor of all sorts measured by one weight. This weight being time itself. So let's say in 3 hours, one table is produced just the same as 3 bags of apples. And then, after some change in production, it now takes 4 hours to produce the table, but still 3 for the apples. And as we said, this is without change in material spent or the price of the material. Maybe the table producer just said, we're tired and we'll be working slower from now on. Now, in order to exchange the 4 hours of table for apples, we require 4 hours of apples in return. This means we require an additional bag of apples for the exchange to be fair and equivalent, for it to take place at all. But in closing the loop in this way, it would seem other pieces also fall into place, no? If this labor time is how we measure the value of the table, the same is true of the wage goods too. Likewise of the tools and of the raw materials. Therefore, all of these becoming measurable factors, we see that value is just the labor time embodied in an object, including the labor time it took to make the raw material inputs. And exchange value being here just a mere expression of the relative values of the goods being exchanged. The table exchanges for 4 bags of apples, this being exchange value, precisely because 1 bag of apples has 1/4 the value of a table, measured in this labor time. Now, you may have noticed, but we have one producer, and one producer only, per good. This being the case, the labor time measured here is, in fact, what you'd call concrete labor time. It is abstract, yes, in the sense that all other objective and subjective properties become ignored in determining exchangeability, in determining value. However, the way we have been describing it, it is still an inherent property of the production process of the good in question. It is specific to it. This remains a fact. But it is a fact we should question, because it's not really realistic to say there is only one producer, one production process in the making of a certain commodity. There, in fact, exist many producers. Some seem to be in a hurry, while others are slower and produce basically at a snail's pace. It is really their mutual interactions that determine the actual labor time by which goods are, in the end, valued. It is said that there exists socially necessary labor time in the production of each good. This socially necessary labor is to be a sort of average of all the goods of the same type that, and this is important, managed to get sold, whose value realized itself in the eyes of society as legitimate, as valid. And we know how these averages work. There is always someone soaring above and someone left hanging below. Let's look at an example for this to sink in. Let's say the average and widespread technique of producing a table to be such that this can be done in like 4 hours of labor on the automatic saw. By virtue of most all tables being made this way, this means that these two tables are valued together as 8 hours of value. However, there exists in the market another, less productive method. Now, this producer could be an honest, hardworking fellow. It's only that they do take a longer lunch break and use a manual saw instead of an automatic one. In any case, it takes 16 hours of labor, double the typical, to produce the same 2 tables. Now, both of these producers go to the market to sell their tables, but the unproductive carpenter won't find much luck. It's just that nobody in their right mind would pay double the price for the same exact table. To sell their goods, the unproductive table producer has to lower prices to reflect the market dominated by the typical producer. So this backwards producer has, with 16 hours of labor, produced the same 8 hours of value. In fact, 8 of their hard-worked hours are deemed invalid and do not count to them. In a way, they get punished brutally for slacking off. But as with all averages, the lower end is met by the higher. It's safe to bet there also exists a producer of an innovative kind. And what they do is they don't only automate the saw, but also don't even go on lunch break, like at all. But again, the market deems this atypical, exclusive, deems it rare and judges the value of the two tables to be 8 hours as a rule. What happens here is the innovative producer gets a treat for producing faster than expected. They get 4 hours of labor counted to them, even though they have not performed them. This is somehow justice, a carrot for the stick. Considering these competitive market conditions, a producer cannot simply lay back and produce slower and slower, making the value and price of their good greater and greater in turn. With this market logic, a hard-working competitor takes the advantage and reaps all the reward. So getting value they haven't really made. Simply put, labor time of backwards producers is snatched from them by the market and redistributed to the innovative ones, in accord with the average social necessary labor time for that good in that society. So from all of this, we have one abstract interobjective property rising to rule them all. We have isolated this to be social necessary labor time, and this to be the abstract kernel of a value. Furthermore, this value is not only abstract in the sense of all other characteristics of production and consumption being ignored in favor of it, but also in that this property finally attributed to any single commodity, at least assuming a competitive market, has very little to do with the concrete production process behind it. In fact, value abstracts not from the multitude of these useful and real properties in favor of only one of them. It in fact demands every possible concrete, physical, even subjective property specific to the commodity, actually leaving us with no property unique to it at all. Now, it is important to note, to bold and underline, the fact that this social necessary labor time does not value make in of itself. For this abstraction to actually become value, it's important to keep in mind all the many real processes, real relations and movements infesting society, some of which we covered in order to derive it. It really must be stressed as a real existing social relation, an abstract one, true, but with incredible power over our lives. It's not just some number. It is the real and historic circumstances of man which give the abstraction its real form. But this social fabric we mentioned, if you think about it, is a very fragile thing. Like a shape in the clouds, the slightest breeze will shift and change things around until the shape becomes unrecognizable. So it stands to reason, and considering the type of people watching these videos, it's safe to say we're on the same page when I say this. It stands to reason this social shift in form is inbound, and to an extent seems inevitable from the real forces, the real breezes at play. So, supposing this new form is such that one of the two threads of value is severed, so the products of labor no longer being held hostage, but shared out in commonwealth. Supposing this, what really remains of the commodity form, of a value? I personally would argue there is, in fact, left nothing to speak of. As soon as all is held in common, exchange, I think, ceases its function as social glue, right? The good, the table, is freed from its commodity straitjacket. It no longer answers to value as we have described it here. It serves direct distribution and consumption. But in this big moment of emancipation, of releasing the object of use from the prison of this great abstractor from value, is it really safe to assume that the whole of the economy would, keep in mind with the political will of mankind reborn, is it safe to assume it would keep itself bound in service to the very same abstraction, the same jailkeeper, in service to socially necessary labor time, or concrete labor time even? If not, and it is a big if, considering much has been written in favor of labor note counting systems, then what would, could, and should be used as an alternative? Furthermore, should we be limited to one property and one property only? Or maybe would society use a composite of properties, considering the climate crisis, the need to produce differently, and to produce less in general? This composite seems sensible. And what of the use value of the production process itself? Should the economy remain limited by the values of objects in terms of consumption, of the use production offers to consumers? Wouldn't workers having actual political control over their lives at their workplaces, their work processes, influence how society looks at this whole ordeal? Should it be expected this transformation of society occurs such that production is recognized as a human need on equal grounds as consumption? These questions are all too much to even start to tackle here, and the video is in no way exhausting of the material. However, they are, I think, important questions, which I hope it is now obvious arise very naturally from what we've covered here on value. A good direction in answering them, I think, is exploring historical examples of revolutionary projects. And so far, we do have some material to work with, particularly looking at how society organized itself in the context of its material reproduction, how it produced, distributed, and consumed. I think all this serves to build a clear picture of what's to come, what we're aiming to achieve. And this is, after all, a powerful tool in shaping how we engage with problems in the here and now. Means and ends are, you may agree, inseparable phenomena. They are one and the same. Therefore, it is my hope that discussion on value as an economic and, above all, a practical political problematic could help in clearing up a lot we're potentially doing wrong in our aim of abolishing it once and for all. Thank you for watching, and be seeing you next time.